So going back to the question that this panel was about, of how we design with others in an ethical way, my question would be, of course, while there's a set of ethical issues that we might all broadly agree on, they're potentially fluid, and you commented on it, Torange, which, what's ethical to one might not be necessarily to another. And I guess if you could all comment a bit on who decides, and perhaps building on what you talked about, governing the disobedience. But I wonder if you could all answer that question, and then we'll open it up.
Yeah. Who decides? So, it's a really interesting point because with the Common Room, the Roman Road Trust is an organization who I've been collaborating with as a residence organization right from the start. And we got into this very tricky situation at one point, also my fault, because I sent things out without talking to them, so things happen all the time. But where they said, "Oh, we thought we're taking it over," when it becomes permanent, and we still haven't quite resolved that. But it was kind of then I had to say to them, "But why do you think that's a good idea for the community, for you to take it on? Why, and what do we do when somebody else comes and say, why aren't we?" taking it on, and so on. And these are things that actually a lot of people don't think about in terms of that. And there is I suppose then my role was a lot about questioning why that was right, and through those questionings, which they can't then answer, certain things reveal themselves, and then we say, so should we explore this further then, because it might not be as black and white, and actually I'm not interested to be involved at all. At one point I want to just hand it over and move away, but all of these kind of take a very long time. So I don't know if that answered what you were saying, who makes the decision. I think it's fluid at the moment in my research, yeah.
It's an interesting question. I guess institutional ethical frameworks are very different to those of practice. So, within my research, the university decides, more or less, ethics act as bollards for institutions rather than shelters somehow, for the privacy and safety of participants. But I guess within my practice, the word ethics rarely, or if ever, comes up. It's something that's negotiated. At best, I think the boundaries are made as transparent as possible, as early as possible. So, those kind of fundamental questions are brought to the surface as soon as possible. So I think, it's a kind of a negotiation, but it's definitely not the role of the designer alone.
Yeah, I think in our work, in relation to social innovation, we've always been thinking how we could streamline those initiatives, and we've been putting focus on those interactions. And I think with the work that we started doing with the libraries, I think the concern here is really how you can design the social infrastructure or the civic infrastructure, so you can look into how you can design the governance for building and sustaining those relationships. And in this way, you can break perhaps with the corporatization of those decisions that are taking over, places that are supposed to nurture democratic relations, like universities and libraries. So I think shifting into the infrastructure that can allow us to support and create the favorable conditions could be one answer. I don't know. I think we are not there yet for who's deciding. I think the decision making still going the same way. I think there are discussions about going not just favoring always consensus, but a positive dissensive or agonism. But I think you need the conditions and the honest and construction of a space where the disobedience can the friendly disobedience perhaps can exist.
Can I say one more thing? I suppose just what I found within the institution, and that's an academic institution, it ended up from my conversations, much more about risk aversion than care, so they don't get sued or, and I'm not saying that's all that it's about, but I think there is, with relational ethics, there's also something around, they talk about partiality, that actually they welcome emotional partiality with ethics of care and ethics of relations, whereas the other, the kind of much more patriarchal, conventional form of ethics is much more about impartiality, and so I think that's where I fight, and I have to fight it all the time within the institution, within the academic institution, that I'm not doing it like that, because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for me to do forms before I engage. They go, whoa, it just doesn't work. So then I'll have to, because I'm building trust, I'm building relationships, and I can't start that with an institutional framework of a form that you have to sign. So it kind of, that's where I think there's this disconnect at the moment.
I'd now like to open it up to the audience. We have a couple of minutes for questions. I saw a question in the back and a question in the front. If I can ask you to wait for the roving microphone, because we are recording this. So we'll take the question in the back, and then we'll take the question here.
Hello. Thank you all. This is a question for all of you, but refers to a point made by Bahbak and by Torange. Bahbak, you showed the pizza oven that was made with the kids, and then it kind of disappeared in the responses that seemed to be realised or proposed for the final outcome. And Torange, you mentioned that some of the activities are supported by developers, and I wondered if any of you would like to comment on a sort of an ethical approach to an economic model for promoting social capital through collaborative design activities.
You can go first.
Yeah. So there are. First of all, the events weren't supported by the developers. It's the wording of capital that they understand. So they understand. So there are kind of different forms of capital: human capital, which is about education; social capital, which is networks; cultural capital, which is what it is; and natural capital and financial capital. So that these kind of, and they understand that because it's an economic terminology. But in terms of, but those other ones, so there are all these forms of capital, but we focus on the financial, and we don't look at all the others because they can't be measured in the same way as the financial can. But without it all, this is just failing because it's within a system that needs all of it, otherwise it's not working. So there are lots of new economic models that are emerging. One is called economy for common good, which I really like a lot, and they've kind of set up matrices where they map the financial with all the other forms of capital, and from what I understand, there are banks and different organizations in Germany who are already taking this kind of economic model on board, and the person who invented it, Christian Felber, is now lobbying the European Commission and people like that. But there are lots of different forms like donut economy, but they're actually quite practical implementing. So sorry.
Thank you. The pizza oven ended up in the forest school of the school, so it's donated back. I think it's still intact and somewhat used. What was important about bringing that was to create a working prototype of a social space, basically, and to understand the limits and the possibilities. And that was one of a number of road closures that we did. So they were there to inform first of all the design, but also to familiarize this space as with a new function to those who frequent it in a way. And I can't really answer so much the financial aspect of the comment of the project.
Was that I've worked in street projects where with kids, and they often suggest food outlets, and there's always an economic challenge around responding directly to that idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all the projects I've worked on too come back to, okay, we'll leave the food out. The food.
Yeah. I think the food was, yeah.
There's an amazing social capital around the possibility of sharing food in common space.
Yeah, it was. I think what was also important was to follow through on a promise with the children, to take their imagination and directly apply it, and to see what that does in engaging the parents and the wider public, and empowering the children in a sense, and not just taking their drawings and looking at them, blowing them up and throwing them in the bin, but really taking it. And I think that was the important transition between their imagination and the creation of the social space, which was a prototype of other types of social spaces. That was a situation where people came, ate, left, no money exchanged, and probably not to be repeated in that form.
We have a question down here. Can I have the roving microphone down here, and then we'll take the question at the back after this question.
My question is: these housing blocks are a knee-jerk response to the housing shortage, because there seems to be no architectural input. There seems to be no long-term. There seems to be no architectural thought into it. It's just, let's quickly build these houses as fast and as cheaply as possible.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. She needs to answer.
Sorry.
Okay, so I think there are two things. So the small sites, I think, so prime site is now, so in London, is so precious that to claim them is going to be quite difficult. But all these small sites, if they're networked together, and if you have a governance structure that they're networked together as a civic infrastructure, then they could actually have quite a lot of impact. And all these tiny sites at one point are going to be super valuable, because land is depletable. If we've built everything, then even they're going to be gold dust. So if we need to act on pieces of land which are not bought by private development at the moment. On the other hand, you can negotiate. We're doing that at the moment with another big development, with a big housing developer, to negotiate a civic infrastructure of land within a housing. Now, housing is a massive, massive issue, and it's not just about design, it's also politics. It's and I think we can talk about that in an entire conference, really. But in a way, I think the problem with that is that it's in a global market, housing. So housing is being sold as a commodity in a global market. It is not about shortage of housing at the moment. So if you have very little land and you're constantly selling it as land banking, as commodity, then you're always going to have shortage. We're a small island. Yeah. But this is, whenever I say this in a group or in a conference, everybody kind of ignores me because they know it's true, but they don't. It's too difficult to deal with, or we won't deal with it because we are a neoliberal kind of country. So I think it's they're all very massive, and I think you have to start. You have to start somewhere small, because otherwise, if you're waiting, if you're trying to infiltrate the system from below, you have to start small, and you have to expand, and you have to know how to work together and grow in collaboration rather than in competition, and then you will make an impact, I think.
Would anyone else like to comment? Otherwise, I think we'll take the last question, which was up there, and then there'll be plenty of time in the coffee break to speak to the speakers and have a dialogue.
Thank you very much to all the speakers. I think some of the discussion is related to the trade-offs between participation and democracy on the one hand, that we show is quite inefficient in many occasions. All the examples you gave are cases where how much time it takes, how much effort it involves from the designer and the community, etc. So the trade-offs sometimes can be described not necessarily as a neoliberal versus non-neoliberal position, but as efficiency versus participation. In fact, the example that Torange was given about the ethics committees from the universities, I will argue that it's seeking efficiency in a way on behalf of the university by describing to participants what are the rules of that democratic game of participation. So in a way, the participant information sheet that we give to people that come to these events, it describes the democratic process by which we seek their opinions. So in a way, I think that's a good way because everybody's time limited, so that forces us to say, okay, this is a process we're going to follow. I understand your limitation, your issues, because that's also valid, that's also true. So my question, I guess, is what are your ideas on how we can better communicate these trade-offs between efficiency, on the one hand, and participation and the time it requires and so on?
Well, it depends on efficiency for whom, right? I think that's one question. I think it's really how you decide and what you decide is efficient and for whom. That's one main thing that I would say. I think in relation to this project, I think the shift is not really about consultation. The shift is really about not from consultation to perhaps building solidarity, building maybe power or even say political power, so you can achieve that sense. So I think we're moving beyond that notion that we are using or discussing participation as a mode of consultation as one challenge that we're seeing. I think it's probably not very efficient depending from where you're looking for, but I think that's the real challenge for making change. It's my...
Yeah, I think if efficiency is measured in production, then I'd like to know what kind of production you're alluding to. There is one particular project I'm doing now in Nottingham where the project has concluded with the formation of a community group consisting of 60 people. So my job is done. But the after effect of the project, which I think is the production of it, in a sense, is living long beyond my involvement. So, yes, maybe the year and a half that I worked on it may have been seen as inefficient, but its legacy and its a kind of after effect and power seems to be a lot longer than that time frame. It's kind of growing and developing. I think also the time relation is important in this.
I mean, I would love to be inefficient, actually. I think it's, in a way, there are all these, again, this normalization that we're talking about, competition is good, efficiency is good, There are all these kinds of words that I think we need to see how through our projects we can interrogate and we can show that actually, there's mistrust between institutions and civil society now, which is creating complete chaos, in a way. We see our political scene. That has been result of very efficient running of cities and very efficient kind of ways of operating. And obviously that hasn't worked very well. So I think we need to kind of now make a case for degrowth and inefficiency, in my opinion.
Redundancy.
Sorry?
And for redundancy.
Yes.
In the true
Yes.
sense that if you build in redundancy.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the papers is going to speak about that this
Yes,
afternoon.
absolutely.
I agree with that. So my question was more about how do you do that?
Yeah.
So I'm not arguing for
Yeah.
efficiency necessarily,
Yeah.
but how do you go beyond
Yeah.
that discourse
Yeah.
where the institutions for more efficiency?
Yeah. But I think it probably ties the two questions in that as designers we don't get taught to raise funds. To actually initiate and implement our own projects with our own ethical positioning rather than being imposed by the ethics of somebody who has money. So I think that's one of the problems of both design education and design practice. And one of the things I had to learn, the way I manage all this is because I know how to raise funds from all sorts of areas, be it from community to to European grants to, but I had to learn it myself because, the university didn't teach me. So that kind of, by projects tapping into an interdisciplinary arena, then it also opens that possibility. Then when you build that research, when you build that body of work, then you can argue it. But you have to do all of the impact analysis and all of that crap in order to actually do kind of prove that it has worked. But yeah.
On that note, I'm going to draw it to a close there.